Okay, let's take a look at how we can really reduce the amount of code that we're writing inside our forms. And what we'll do is we'll just head over to the documentation once again in Formic. And if we take a look at their API reference, then we've got a number of different hooks, React hooks we can use with Formic. And let's take a look at use field. Because we're going to be creating reusable text input fields, then we can use the use field, which, as it says, automatically, they use this word a lot, helps us to hook up inputs to Formic. You can and should use it to build your own custom input primitives, and there's two ways to use it. And if we take a look at the example here, we'll create an interface. We've done that before. And then we create a function. In this case, they just called it myTextField, and they pass the props to this field. And then they use the useField hook, and they get the field, the metadata, and helpers from the useField, and they pass in the props. And then they spread across the properties they get from the field, and also the props that we get from the values here. And then we've got the metadata to see if the field has been touched and if the field has any errors. And then we can use this to display an error label. So what do we get then when we're spreading the field properties into an input? Well, if we go and take a look at the field input props, then we get the name, we get things like onBlur to see if the field has been touched, we get the onChange handler, we get the value. And we get this from the useField when we spread the props across the field. So these are pretty powerful, and this is going to save us a lot of typing. So what we'll do is we'll go across and we'll create our own custom text input component. So what we'll do, we'll open up Solution Explorer, and inside the app, let's create a new folder, and we'll call it Common. And inside this folder, we'll create another new folder and call it Form. And inside this folder, we'll create a new file, and we'll just call it myTextInput.tsx. And what we'll do is we'll just do the normal. We'll import React from React, and we'll say export default function, and we'll say myTextInput. And what we need to do here is create an interface for the props that we're going to pass it. So we'll say interface props, and we need a placeholder, which is going to be a string. We'll need the name of the input, again a string, and we'll need the label, and we'll make the label optional. We won't always supply a label. We'll just make do with placeholders in our form, but if we want a label at some point later on with our text inputs, we'll just add the logic here to do so. And then what we'll do is we'll just pass in our props and specify it's a type of props. We won't worry about destructuring what we're doing inside here. And then what we'll do is we'll use the useField hook, and what we want to get from this is the field and the meta. And we'll say useField, which we get from Formic. And we need to pass into this the props.name. And this then is going to tie this up with the matching field that we're using for the text input. And what we want to do here is say return, and we'll use form.field that we get from Semantic UI, and make sure this has been brought in, and yeah, that's fine. We've got the form from Semantic UI React, and we're just using form.field. So that's absolutely fine. And what we'll do is we'll pass in error to this element. And if there is an error, this will just shade the entire field in a kind of pinky reddish color. And we'll check to see if the field has been touched. And the meta property or the meta object gives us options such as if we've got an error, if the field has been touched, or we can get the value here as well. So we're just going to check to see if the field has been touched. And we want to see if the error object exists. And what we'll do is we'll just say double exclamation mark and meta.error. And this double exclamation mark just makes this object into a Boolean, because the error is going to be a string or it's going to be undefined. And we're just going to cast this into a Boolean based on whether it exists or if it's undefined. So then what we'll do is we'll add a label. just a normal HTML label in here, and we'll specify props.label. And below this, we'll add an input, normal HTML input at this stage. And inside here, what we'll do is we'll spread the field props, and just by adding the period, we can see what's available inside this field. And we've got the onBlur, the onChange, and the value that we're passing or spreading into the input field here. And then we'll do the same for the props so that we also get the placeholder, the name, and the label if we needed it. And below the inputs, what we can do then is check to see if we've got any errors. So we'll say meta.touched and meta.error, and then we'll add a ternary. So we'll add a question mark, open some parentheses, and if we do have an error, we're going to specify label from semantic UI. And we'll make it basic and give it a color equal to red. And inside the label, we're just going to pass in the meta.error, which is going to be a string if it exists. And if we don't have an error, then we're just going to pass null instead of the label. And this is it. This is all we need for our reusable text input. So what we can do, we can head back to our activity form. And what we'll do is we'll replace our form field. We'll just take this out in its entirety, and we'll just add my text inputs. And we need to give this a name, and it's going to be equal to title. And we'll give it a placeholder and set this equal to title as well. And if we go and take a look at our progress, and we go back to our form, and we just refresh the page, then if we click in and click out, then we can see that we've got all of our functionality, including the field itself being shaded that pink color to tell us that there's an error, and we get the label to tell us what's missing here. And if we type anything back in, the error goes away. So what we'll do, we'll just do the same for our other fields here. And let's just highlight all of our fields and select all of them and just say my text inputs. And what we'll also do at the same time is we'll just add validation for all of these fields as well. So we'll come back up to our validation schema, and we'll add validation for the description. So we'll just copy the title down, and we'll say description, and we'll say the activity description is required. And we'll copy this down again, but this time we'll just use the default error message that we get with yup. We won't worry about adding our own custom messages. And then we'll say category. And then we'll just copy this down 3 more times and swap category for dates. And then we'll have the venue. And then we'll have the city. And if we go take a look at our form now, what we'll find if we refresh the page, and it looks like I've got an error here with my imports. It tells us that identifier my text input has already been declared. What did I do wrong there? And okay, so we've got all sorts of input shenanigans going on here. So let's just fix this. Not entirely sure what happened there, to be honest, but we only need it in the one place, of course. And that looks good. Okay, so let's go back and let's refresh the page once again. And the next error is that we don't have a type property available on our text input. So I'll just head back to the form and we'll just remove the type from the text input. We'll do something different for the date soon anyway, so we'll just leave it as a string input for now. And now we get our form back. And what we should find is that if we touch these fields, then all of them are going to have the validation applied. And we should be able to just type in each field and the errors will go away, and we should be able to submit, and we'll get our form object output into the console. So far so good. But our fields are not all text input. Some of them are different, and we'll take a look at our description next, because this should be a text area and not just a text input. And we'll take a look at that next.